EpicDev podcast, tech products that work.
Welcome to the EpicDev podcast. Here at EpicDev, we build and maintain tech products that work. And in these discussions, we chat about pretty much anything and everything in our industry, just to share some of our experience and insights.
Today, we're going to be discussing custom software versus off-the-shelf tools. And luckily, Lannon, you're the right guy to answer these questions. So I'm going to jump in and ask the first one. How often does a potential client come to you with an idea for a bespoke solution, but you point them to a pre-existing solution that meets their needs sufficiently? So literally like the custom software versus off-the-shelf comparison, but where you actually lead your client to an off-the-shelf tool instead of custom building them something.
Yeah, so it happens quite often. I would say maybe like a 50-50% ratio. What we get a lot are things where people want to replicate things that are quite popular in the markets at the moment. They want to replicate that for their own businesses, but potentially what they're looking to do is, I suppose, have ownership over the product. So I'll give you a silly example. So one thing that happens a lot is restaurants that have, or takeaway chains that have sort of grown a bit, and there are a couple of these restaurants around in a certain area, and then they immediately start feeling like, okay, we want some sort of delivery app. And the first thing they think of is Uber. That's like a very popular request, or not popular request, but a request that we get very often, is they suddenly now want you to build an Uber Eats or a Mr. D for their operation. The business is doing well, and they've got, say, 7 different takeaway shops in various locations, and they feel like, okay, this is the next step. And then I would often, when we start speaking about the sort of timeline and budget that would go into something like this, that's where they start feeling a little bit maybe not as excited about the idea anymore.
Yeah, a bit apprehensive, maybe.
A bit apprehensive now all of a sudden, But, most of them are sort of, they realize, okay, yeah, fair enough. This is like cutting edge technology. And but what I try and do from my side is to kind of soften the blow a little bit as I first start speaking about the fact that there are probably quite a lot of solutions out there. And I immediately start with a bit of industry jargon, as they would see it, such as, have you looked around for some white labeled solutions? And at that stage, the response might be, well, what do you mean by white labeled solutions? And that's where I start talking about these things and explaining and educating a little bit. I take the time to try and educate the person on the other end of the phone to just get their brain to work in a little bit of a different, or think in a bit of a different way about how the solution can be applied. And as we go down that discussion, I'll start explaining, okay, look, usually with these sorts of things, since it's been done, there's going to be guys that have now already invested quite a lot of time and resources into replicating that solution, for example, Uber Eats, and they're going to make it their business to then license that out to a whole lot of companies, because a whole lot of companies are going to want that solution. That's a given. Like, you're not the only guy that's just thought of this. Like, there's hundreds of thousands of guys around the globe that have thought of the same thing.
Yeah.
And sure, if you really have put yourself on the map and you have enough chains and you do have that sort of budget, then by all means, there might be a reason as to why, like, you might have already thought of all those things. The fact that there's white label solutions out there. In that discussion, I would discover that with the person. They'll soon push back and say, yes, we've looked at white label solutions, but we need it to be our intellectual property.
Yeah.
We usually use the acronym IP. We have to have it be our IP because of such and such reasons, and then fine, then we can explore. But more often than not, when you start explaining white labeled solutions and licensing these things, you completely change the way these guys are thinking, and they start exploring those solutions. And I think sometimes I also hope that if they go down that road and they find a white label solution that would work for them, that they would come back to us and say, would you help me implement it? Because even though you go find yourself a solution like that, it's also not always plug and play the way people hope for it to be, you know.
If you could maybe take a brief moment, perhaps there's somebody watching this or listening to it who's literally in this position right now. They've got a chain and they've been thinking of this idea to build an app, and they hear you throwing this terminology, white labeled solution, around. Wouldn't you maybe just give like a very brief description for somebody as to what exactly is that? What are they looking for when they're comparing or considering white labeled solutions?
Yeah, so I think you got to do your due diligence. So first of all, let's clearly define a white labeled solution. So basically what it is that someone else has gone and developed the software, but they've developed it in such a way that it can be, your colors and your brand can be applied to it very quickly and very easily. So it was, imagine Uber Eats has got a way of resetting the brand and immediately adopting your brand. So that's basically what a white label is. So hence the terminology white label. So it's a blank label onto which you can stamp your brand. Okay, and what they need to look out for is, first of all, reputation. You're going to want to do, so the same way that you would go if you want to purchase a product, let's say off of Takealot even, if you thought to yourself, okay, there's this product, I'm going to do a little bit of due diligence on it. Okay, those of us that have done enough e-commerce shopping know that the process of doing your due diligence in terms of reading the reviews and maybe even going on to social media, which is like an unbiased third party where you can go and read what people are saying about this product, especially if you're buying from somewhere that you've never bought from before. You know, you might already be so used to buying from Takealot and Amazon, and you might have already been through the process where you've done a return, and you then realize that they handle that with great seriousness, because they understand that the trust factor is a big hurdle to get over for consumers buying online. So you'd find yourself, if you've been through that process and you're now looking at the specific thing that you can only find this one shop selling online that you've never shopped at before, you're going to do quite a bit of research before you actually pull the trigger and hand them your hard-earned money. Now, you need to do that same sort of thing when it comes to these white label solutions. Chances are there's going to be quite a few options, and then you've got to start sifting through some data online that you can make an informed decision about parting with your money.
So for interest's sake, you can maybe just answer this very briefly, but are there any circumstances in which you offer a client a service to help them find a white labeled solution?
Not particularly. At EpicDev, we're very custom, a very bespoke outfit. So it's more just a case of someone calling us up or sending us an email and asking for a certain piece of software. You know, if generally they ask us to build it, but you do get those that are savvy enough to know that building it is going to be hectic and going to cost quite a bit. So perhaps they would ask that, do you know of any solutions out there that can fit this requirement for us? And then we would just literally go and do the research and see if there are any out there. And before doing all that due diligence, we'll first just see if there are some solutions out there, and then return the call or email and just say, okay, look, it looks like there are some solutions out there. We can take this discussion further if you want to, you know.
Super cool. The next question actually kind of segues a little bit from that, but it's sort of the next step deep into the process. So now you've had the chat with the customer. They say they've checked all the white labeled solutions. They don't like it. And they've got the infrastructure and the resources to get EpicDev on board to create a bespoke solution. Now, how often would you for instance, okay, you guys sign the contract or however you approach that, and you start the job, how often would you actually go and look at the pre-existing solutions for inspiration on how to execute this problem? Maybe this is a bit of industry secrets, but basically having a look at what's already out there and then seeing how you would improve it or custom build it for your clients' needs.
Oh, all the time. Yeah, that sort of research is very important because it's kind of similar to two heads are better than one, or a group of people making a decision is going to be better than you just isolating yourself and thinking up what you think is the greatest scenario. That would be the same reason why you would go do some industry research on pretty much anything that you take on, to be honest, whether that's going to be a white label solution that you put together for someone or build a bespoke piece of software from the ground up. You're going to want to go and find competitors in the market that have done these sorts of things already to learn from what they've done. It's very important.
Do you have any case studies where a client tried to make an off-the-shelf solution work for them, but it just completely failed to the point where they eventually came to you? And perhaps you could talk about then, I suppose you would use their attempt as a launching pad. They would already be able to tell you what failed, and I suppose that would help you a little bit with the direction for the bespoke solution.
I can't 100% recall specific projects right on the spot now that we had gotten involved in where that was the exact case, but I have been in meetings many times where the client has approached us for a bespoke solution because they're tired of the fact that the current solution is a scenario where you're trying to squeeze a block into a round hole, so to speak. So one thing that comes to mind is we never actually went ahead with this project because I think that maybe the budget wasn't right, or not sure. They don't always tell you. The one that comes to mind is quite a couple of years ago, we were asked to come out to it was like a linen factory, and they were actually running like an ERP to manage the entire factory and manufacturing process. But this particular piece of software was actually developed for a canning factory, like canned beans and canned goods, and they were just really, they made it work, as is usually the case, but they were at a point where they were really starting to get tired of, I suppose, the hoops that they had to jump through to make that thing work for them. So they approached us and asked if we could develop a bespoke solution for them, because they had basically got to the point where they just felt, look, it's enough is enough. We can't always operate. We can't continue to operate like this in terms of future growth. And at some point, we're going to have to take this leap. Other scenarios that we've also gotten ourselves into a lot is where people have taken like a whole lot of different applications that together make the process work for them and their company, and then have finally gotten to a point where they decided, okay, we're tired of bootstrapping everything together with these 5, 6, 7 applications to fulfill the process and all the shortcomings in between, and manual intervention for the one to this data and this process to now, because it ends here in this app, and then to make it go into the next app and then work from there is a manual process. They get tired of all of that. They say, okay, the time is now for us to invest in developing our own thing, which then becomes this piece of software that has to do what all these 5, 6, or 7 applications currently do for us, including the steps in between where there's manual intervention. Because obviously, it goes without saying that all of them are going to be in one system, but sometimes there are like human systems implemented in between that you don't quite think of. So even though you've got 5 apps, you've almost actually got 10 or 9, because in between there's little human systems as well that you created and cultivated for the entire ecosystem to work. So there are a few projects that we had actually gotten involved in where we did where we ended up building a complete system that does what a couple of systems did for these guys previously.
Sure. I love the conversation of how there's potentially these steps in between that we kind of subconsciously don't consider as part of this automated process because we've just become so used to doing it. But actually, in a full bespoke solution, you would want that automated and in the process. That's very cool.
Kind of what people are now trying to get AI to do for them is fill in all those little gaps and things to automate 100%. The process entirely. But then your only problem is the faith that you have to put into that AI agent. How are you going to measure this metric that we call hallucination? So how do you ever actually know if your system is outputting credible data, for example, if you've got this agent in between? I'm not saying that it can't be done. It most certainly can be done, but you've got to treat that a little bit differently to a system that was built specifically for certain processes. Because now suddenly it's like throwing this wild card in between, because this thing can do kind of anything. So you got to be very careful. It's not as easy as people think it is.
It's a really intelligent toddler.
Yeah, that's quite a clever way of putting it.
Anyway, we've got a really great question here. A lot of current industry commentary frames 2026 as the year of hybrid approaches and then becoming sort of the default, where people are buying commodity tools but building the differentiating layer on top. Does this match what you're seeing with EpicDev's clients, particularly in the Durban crowd versus the international crowd, for instance?
I would say definitely yes. So, I mean, if you think about it, everyone is sort of catering to that as a solution, because if you wanted to build a system that was going to take care of everything for you in your organization, I think that's definitely wishful thinking, which is why you see your cloud solutions like your Google Cloud platform, GCP, or Azure, the Microsoft one, or your AWS. All of these solutions, basically what they're trying to do is just create this ecosystem where the data lives. And then you can basically take that data and pass it between from application to application. Each one, so the way they explain it is it's one big horizontal onto which you build your verticals. If you think about it, that's actually quite a clever analogy, because they're all plugged into the horizontal. So that's where those little manual interventions that I spoke of earlier then doesn't become a problem anymore, because this vertical can be taught to speak to this vertical and then that vertical. And what this guy over here does is he, for example, mines the data and brings it into the system. And then this guy over here analyzes the data. And then that guy over here, a good example would be like your BI, your business intelligence. He gives you a dashboard to view for a human to now analyze the data, and so on and so forth, So that, I'm not sure if that answers the question, because in my mind, that's kind of a hybrid system that you're putting together over there. So 100%, that's where everyone's moving. Even with it becoming agentic, if you think about it, because that ecosystem now also has the ability for an agent to live there. And the agent can now also understand the differences between the verticals. He can also kind of go on the horizontal from here to there, and then be its own vertical in certain circumstances as well, where he gives you this information that you're looking for, or historical information at a given point, that sort of thing,
That's awesome. So I'm wondering now, this sort of Google Cloud infrastructure and AWS and Azure and stuff have been in development and been around for a few years. It's not like just all of a sudden, Did you notice a difference in the types of projects that came to you that you guys ended up actually building bespoke software since the introduction of this stuff? Because what I'm hearing is I'm kind of hearing that those are off-the-shelf solutions for what appears like a bespoke hybrid approach. It's like they're filling that space, so to speak, but it's an off-the-shelf solution. So I'm imagining that now it's created this extra tier between off-the-shelf and EpicDev bespoke. We built this service from the ground up. There's now these layers in between. There's this cloud services and now agentic services. And are you seeing a difference in clients and jobs that you're actually taking, or has your work stayed more or less the same?
No, there's a big difference, and it's a good thing, because previously, way back in the day, I got to think quite far back, like 15, 16 years, we would try and build these systems to basically do everything for the client, act as an electronic way where the data can be inputted or captured rather, sorry. And then also, for example, give you some graphs and things on a dashboard for your business intelligence, okay? Without necessarily wanting it to be, it does just become this gigantic piece of software that you've got to build. Either that, or you take shortcuts. What we used to have back in the day then when we were working in that kind of environment is you would have these libraries that people would start developing, these little libraries. So if you think about it, it was also already kind of in the making, because you would use like a high charts graphing library that's built on JavaScript or something, and you would bring that into your application. So all the pressure was on you to create this entire thing, even though you would already start sort of piecing it together with these libraries that are out there. Now, you don't even think like that. You just, if someone tells you the entire ecosystem that they require for their business to operate, and it includes this type of management of the data and this type of business intelligence, all you're really thinking of is, okay, I've just got to build this one vertical that is going to allow this guy, for example, to input the data in this clever way that they inputted, or maybe this vertical is going to mine it from their pedestal or something like that. And because you're doing it in this cloud environment, you know that those other tools are already going to be available to you. That now what happens though is that you got to become quite knowledgeable with all these different tools that are in that cloud environment. So you don't necessarily have to be the expert anymore in developing all these things, but you do have to be somewhat of an expert of how these verticals work in that cloud environment, so that you can bring just that one vertical in, and then you can plug it into everything else to give the guy the entire ecosystem that he's looking for.
Have you found that there's some tension, though, with this kind of infrastructure, this hybrid infrastructure, where you, in the example, you create this one vertical where your user is inputting data, and then the whole infrastructure is busy doing its work. But do you find that there's sometimes some tension between you've created this vertical, but now you're being held responsible for how another vertical is behaving?
It happens. It happens a lot, and it is a problem. In fact, we were in a meeting for this exact topic not too long ago, where we had to explain and literally have a whiteboard session to explain, look, this is our solution, this is that solution, this is that solution, because it's also not necessarily all provided by the cloud provider. Like, let's say Google, for example, GCP. They're going to have their products, but there are going to be third-party products as well. Like, they're not going to be able to serve up everything that the world's looking for. So that creates an economy now. Other people are building for this environment specific solutions that people are going to be looking for. So now you bring these other third parties in as well. Some of them are Google products, some of them are third-party, and here's your solution sitting over here. And the client just sees like, yes, okay, but still, if I press this button, I don't get the payload that I'm looking for. So what did you guys do wrong? It's like, well, and the worst part is if some third-party product was discontinued for some reason, deprecated, and then you have to, well, not only is it not just working at the moment, and it's not our fault, it's got nothing to do with us, but to be honest with you, we're actually going to require quite a lot more budget from you because we've got to migrate from this product to this other product. So it's like a double whammy. Like they're really not impressed with you at the moment because the solution's not working. And your answer is, well, give me more budget because I need to integrate with a different product. And I've actually got nothing to do with you, with it. Sometimes it also is, you got to sort of explain to them in a very diplomatic way that you guys were actually the ones that chose that solution. You were the ones that brought that product to us. We integrated that. Now, for some reason, support has been stopped. We've got to look somewhere else and do it a little bit differently. Yeah, they also don't quite like you pointing fingers back at them, but happens.
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit of a bittersweet situation, like with most technological advances. But you're at the point now where the sort of bespoke solution becomes actually a little bit more within reach for the average company. But that's only because there's so much infrastructure integration that you can exploit already. But you could build a completely bespoke service. You could do all the grunt work and rebuild all those services, but it's just going to cost way too much money and it's not plausible, right? But then at least you would be responsible for the whole infrastructure and your client could just be like, well, you built this, So it's a bit bittersweet because you've increased your target market to some extent with all this amazing infrastructure that's available. But it does make sometimes the client relations a little bit more tricky.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, it's still better to have all these tools at our disposal. And I would say that even with AI lumped into that same category, it's still better. We can still move faster. We can still spin up more solutions than what we were able to 10 to 20 years ago. So it's still better. But I think people get a little bit too optimistic about these tools, which I think at the moment, the elephant in the room is AI. Like, I
Guilty.
I will never say that it's not great. I will never say that it's not great. It's amazing, and EpicDev has wholeheartedly adopted it, and we use it, and I already can't do without it. But when I see how overly optimistic people are about it, I mean, you just have to even just look at the stock market. Then I want to tell people to stop and just stop thinking. Like, that analogy of when you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. Like, don't do that, man. Like, how many times as the human race do we have to make this mistake? A tool is a tool. Don't put it on such a high pedestal.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, I've got one last question, I think, for this session, Lannon. And this is probably a good opportunity for you to do a little bit of a push to anybody who's been considering a bespoke solution and they just need a little push over the edge. What is the advantage of creating a full bespoke solution rather than just plumbing a stack of commercial solutions together via API calls and automation?
Complete control would be the first thing that comes to mind. Owning the IP like outrightly, making sure that you don't get yourself trapped into these scenarios where you've got all these different products that are coming together in the ecosystem, and the one might behave well today and not so well tomorrow, which I suppose is also just a long way of saying control. This might not be the way that the question was phrased, so it's not necessarily an answer specifically to it, but there always has to be a use case, so it needs to make sense. And if it makes sense, then go for it. If for some reason you have to own the IP completely, and if for some reason you need to have an immense level of control, then that's the direction that you should go in,
If somebody wants to reach out to EpicDev, perhaps to get some assistance with checking whether the use case is reasonable and plausible and, exploring this journey of bespoke software, what is the process of getting in touch with you?
Oh, well, just go browse our website at epicdev.co.za or give us a call to book a session with either myself or Dustin on 031 767 5580. Or just pop us an email, info@epicdev.co.za, and yeah, we can get back in touch with you and start the discussion.